Hey there, welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case, and tonight, J.D. Vance attacks Kamala Harris on the border crisis. Israel and the U.S. prepare for a counterattack from Iran, and the FACE Act continues to be weaponized against pro-life Americans. And of course, still filling in for Renata Kiss is FISM's Ian Patrick. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Sam. It is always a pleasure to be hosting alongside you, especially with all the stories we have today. I'm excited to hear what J.D. Vance had to say to Harris while he was at the southern border.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at that right now then, shall we? Well, as Ian just said, Trump VP pick J.D. Vance visited the southern border in Arizona yesterday, where he called out Kamala Harris's record as President Biden's border czar. Take a look at this.
They started their administration. Kamala Harris came into office making promises, and she kept those promises to open the American southern border. They stopped deportations on day one. They stopped construction of the border wall on day one. We see the border wall sitting here, ready to be completed behind us, and that can't happen because of Kamala Harris's administration. They reinstated catch and release, and they stopped remain in Mexico. So all of these asylum claimants who come to our border, they can now get released into our country because they're not forced to stay in Mexico while we adjudicate their asylum claims. And we have to remember that as terrible and idiotic as these policies were, they cause real human beings to suffer.
Vance then went on to highlight the record amount of fentanyl coming across the border, killing tens of thousands of Americans each year.
A lot of you know my story, and I have been a little kid waiting at the bedside of his mother, angry that his mom took something that she shouldn't have taken, but praying to God, please, Jesus, let her wake up. And the unfortunate truth is because of the poison that Kamala Harris has let come into this country, there are a lot of those prayers that won't be answered. There are a lot of parents that won't wake up because when you take fentanyl, you don't wake up. It takes your life.
Following his speech, Vance continued his attacks against the vice president. Speaking to a CNN reporter, Vance defended Trump's recent controversial comments about Harris's racial identity, slamming her as a political chameleon.
He said that Vice President Harris is, quote, all of a sudden black. As a father of 3 biracial children, did those comments give you pause at all?
They don't give me pause at all. Look, all he said is that Kamala Harris is a chameleon. She goes to Georgia 2 days ago. She was raised in Canada. She puts on a fake Southern accent. She is everything to everybody, and she pretends to be somebody different depending on which audience she's in front of. She's running as a tough-on-crime prosecutor, even though she implemented open border policies. She's saying that she wants to support the police, yet she wanted to defund the police just 3 years ago.
And while we're looking at the border, let's take a look also at the latest government statistics, where illegal crossings actually fell for the 5th consecutive month in July. This effectively makes last month the lowest amount of illegal crossings since September of 2020. But Border Patrol agents still reported that there were 56,000 migrant apprehensions last month. Now, for context, during a spike in illegal immigration late last year, border encounters actually exceeded 250,000 just in the month of December alone. It is also worth noting that these numbers do not include entries at official border crossings, where authorities process over 1,500 migrants per day. Still, the White House has taken credit for the lower numbers. In a statement, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said, quote, "This is the product of a number of actions this administration has taken." However, should the numbers decline to 1,500 encounters per day, the White House said it will lift restrictions.
And on top of those lower numbers, border hawks do have another reason to celebrate with a major win coming out of Missouri. AG Andrew Bailey announced this week he's now received a federal court order forcing the Biden administration to use congressionally appropriated funds to finish Trump's border wall. Bailey said this, quote, "The rest of President Trump's border wall is going up because of this lawsuit." Back in 2020, Congress designated $1.4 billion for border wall construction, which the Biden administration ultimately chose not to use. Missouri and Texas sued the administration soon after. Bailey said the administration has not chosen to appeal this ruling, making this week's ruling final.
And now in Congress earlier this week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced a bill that targets the legal defense used by President Trump in recent criminal cases. In a statement, Schumer announced the so-called No Kings Act, which he said would clarify that the Constitution does not grant legal immunity to presidents for official acts committed while in office.
I'm introducing the No Kings Act. This legislation is as simple as the name it bears. It reaffirms that presidents do not have immunity from violations of criminal law and removes the Supreme Court's jurisdiction to hear appeals related to the presidential immunity, which the Constitution explicitly empowers Congress to do.
Of course, there is a little bit of political bias in this bill. In a later interview on MSNBC, while discussing the act, Schumer criticized the Supreme Court and its ruling.
We want to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. It's not too late because the court just made this awful ruling that said if the president does something official, he can't be held accountable, and he more or less can define what's official. You know, Nixon, right before Watergate, said if the president does it, it's legal. That's utter bull. That's not what the Founding Fathers said, and it's not in the Constitution. But we call this the No Kings Act because Americans, from George Washington all on to the future, we don't want a king. We want a president who is limited by the rule of law. This was the most awful ruling by this court.
The bill, as it stands, currently has 34 Democrat co-sponsors.
But even if it had all the co-sponsors, Ian, it still wouldn't go anywhere in the Republican-controlled House. So this is probably more of a political stunt than anything else for the 2024 election, right?
I would absolutely agree. In fact, Speaker Mike Johnson has not said anything on it yet, but I imagine he'd use similar rhetoric for other bills and say something along the lines of it would be dead as soon as it reaches the House.
Yeah, he tends to say that about a lot of those things, right? Speaking of the House, Republicans are up in arms with the Pentagon's plea deal allowing the terrorist mastermind behind 9/11 to escape the death penalty. For example, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is calling it a national disgrace and a revolting abdication of justice. While at the same time, Trump VP pick J.D. Vance and Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, they both slammed the deal, alleging a double standard of justice from the Biden administration.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have weaponized the Department of Justice to go after their political opponents, but they're cutting a sweetheart deal with 9/11 terrorists.
This administration, let's just put it this way, they won't arrest anybody who are out there defacing our statues, tearing down American flags, burning them right there in public, right in front of the Capitol, and raising the Hamas flag. They turn around and make a deal with the 9/11 terrorist.
The White House denies President Biden was involved in the process in any way, saying he only learned of the deal on Wednesday.
The White House played no role in this process, and the president directed his team to consult as appropriate with officials and lawyers and Department of Defense, obviously. You know, our hearts go out to the families who lost loved ones on that day.
And that's not the only deal that's receiving some pushback. Former President Donald Trump is also speaking out against yesterday's prisoner swap with Russia, the one that freed Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and former Marine Paul Whelan, among others. Here's Trump.
Well, as usual, it was a win for Putin or any other country that deals with us, but we got somebody back, so I'm never going to be challenging that. It wouldn't have happened with us. We would have gotten it back. We wouldn't have had to pay anything. We wouldn't have had to let some of the great killers of the world go.
In all, 24 prisoners were freed, with Russia receiving 8 prisoners from multiple countries.
And finally, the Secret Service still remains under fire for failings that nearly led to the assassination of former President Donald Trump. Recently, the Homeland Inspector General reportedly told Congress this week that he actually warned the agency months ago about dangerous deficiencies within the force. And that includes communication breakdowns with local police partners, as well as inadequate training for event security. According to the federal auditor, the Secret Service should have learned key lessons from the events surrounding January 6, 2021. Notably, the agency failed to respond to local police communications about a suspicious individual at the Trump rally. The report was completed back in April, and Republicans have accused Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas of blocking access to it. But that may soon change because the Inspector General told Congress he'll soon release a heavily redacted version of it. And up next, Israel confirms the death of Hamas's top military commander and other international news. That and more when we come back.
Fear and uncertainty can cause us to hold things tightly and rely on ourselves. But during uncertain times, as believers in Christ, we are called to surrender fully to our sovereign God. The call to surrender to Jesus is one step in our growth in holiness. And it doesn't just mean you give over a few things. It means He gets it all, including our finances, our investments. Learn a biblically responsible investment strategy proven over 25 years. Keep the money God has entrusted to you out of companies that participate in things that God detests. Fully surrender. Become a Financial Issues Partner today. Learn more by going to financialissues.org/join. That's financialissues.org/join.
Saving the unborn is one of the most amazing things that we can do in this day and age. Hi, my name is Shanna Burt, host of Financial Issues. Would you go to preborn.org right now? Consider giving $140. That will allow 5 young mothers to hear the heartbeat of their baby and change their mind to choose life over abortion. Go to preborn.org. That's preborn.org. It's an incredible ministry, Preborn. We're fighting back through saving tens of thousands of lives. And Preborn doesn't just save the baby. They ask these young mothers to go through a program of evangelism so that their eternal lives might be saved as well. Would you come alongside us for the kingdom, for the glory of Christ? Go to preborn.org. That's preborn.org.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. We continue with some news coming out of Israel, where the IDF confirmed on Thursday that it had eliminated yet another Hamas military leader. According to the IDF, an airstrike in Khan Yunis last month resulted in the death of Mohammed Deif, who was the head of Hamas's military wing. Now, Hamas had not confirmed nor denied the death of Deif, but instead they insisted that such announcements are its responsibility to make, not Israel's. But regardless, the likely assassination of Deif is still a big deal. He topped Israel's most wanted list for decades and was an influential member within Hamas. He helped develop its network of terror tunnels underneath Gaza and even aided in its bomb-making abilities. Deif is also believed to have been one of the masterminds of the October 7th attack against Israel, which then triggered the wider war in Gaza. With Deif's death, it is estimated that Israel has now eliminated up to 80% of the senior leadership for Hamas as well.
But it looks like the destruction of Hamas could come with some repercussions. Israeli officials met earlier this week as they now prepare for an expected attack from Iran, which is vowing revenge over the assassination of Hamas's top political leader. The meeting came after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that any attack on Israel will be met with severe retaliation. He told reporters, quote, Israel is at a very high level of preparation for any scenario, both defensive and offensive. We will make sure any act of aggression against us will pay a very high price.
And as Israel takes its own steps in preparation, the U.S. is weighing its own options on what to do for its Middle Eastern ally. Upon indication that Iran will certainly retaliate against Israel, U.S. officials have begun preparing for every conceivably possible scenario. The Pentagon and U.S. Central Command are reportedly mobilizing U.S. military assets in the Gulf, Eastern Mediterranean, and Red Sea regions in preparation. One official speaking with Axios even said they, quote, expect a few rough days ahead. Intelligence from both Israel and the U.S. has also suggested that an Iranian attack could take a few days to materialize, but that it could come in the form of wide-ranging missiles when it does happen. At the same time, however, the U.S. does continue to pursue a diplomatic path for the region. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Wednesday, the best way to bring down the temperature is, quote, through a ceasefire in Gaza.
The best way to bring the temperature down everywhere and to put us on a better path is through a ceasefire in Gaza. That will have I think, important effects on other areas where you could see conflict, whether it's in the north of Israel and Lebanon, whether it's Iran, whether it's in the Red Sea with the Houthis. So that's why the focus on the ceasefire needs to remain, and for us, it will very much remain on that.
And it appears Iran is ready to make good on their threat against Israel as Iranian mourners chanted death to Israel during the procession of slain Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. During the service, senior Hamas official Halil al-Hayya vowed to, quote, pursue Israel until it is uprooted from the land of Palestine, while at the same time others warned Israel will pay a heavy price for his death.
And surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, it isn't just Iran that's mourning over the loss of Haniyeh, as a recent protest in New York City's Times Square saw pro-Palestine attendees holding portraits of the slain Hamas leader, calling for revolution and intifada. Take a look. This protest was meant to be a disruption of a pro-Israel event, which was taking place just across the street. The demonstration also appears to have turned violent, as a group actually surrounded two pro-Israel individuals at one point. According to journalist Olia Scootercaster, who documented the entire exchange, these individuals used pepper spray on the protesters, quote, after liquid was thrown at them outside of Times Square IDF support rally. The pepper spray appeared to have affected a nearby child of a pro-Palestine family. That child was taken away by ambulance to be treated, and the woman who used the pepper spray was reportedly detained by police, but not arrested.
And before we go to break here, Venezuela continues to be the source of controversy as the U.S. is now recognizing opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez as Venezuela's rightful president-elect, officially rejecting the self-proclaimed victory of communist dictator Nicolas Maduro. It comes as the opposition party has now obtained and released 80% of the tally sheets, which the State Department says shows an overwhelming victory.
We know that at least 12 million people peacefully went to the polls and exercised their right to vote, and that the sum of more than the 80% of the tally sheets published by the Democratic opposition and received directly from polling stations show that Edmundo Gonzalez received an overwhelming majority of the votes in this election.
Maduro has responded to the U.S., saying the United States needs to keep its nose out of Venezuela. And coming up next, a disturbing Planned Parenthood video has resurfaced that was previously buried by Kamala Harris. We'll look at that video and more after a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. Tonight, let's explore some of the most joyous days in American military history. These days would signify the end of the bloodiest and most catastrophic conflict in world history, World War II. Let's travel roughly 75 years back to 1945 to Victory in Europe Day and Victory in Japan Day. Since 1939, the world had been entangled in a bitter struggle between two chief alliances, the Allied powers and the Axis powers. Millions of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and civilians had lost their lives in the worldwide struggle between democracy and dictatorship, a classic historical showdown of good and evil. After a ferocious start from the Axis, the Allies took command in the last several years of the war. By early 1945, the Axis powers in Europe had all but collapsed. With the USSR closing in on Germany in the east and the United States and Great Britain penetrating Western Europe, the fascist powers that had once strangled the European landmass began to fall. The decisive moment was the double suicide of Adolf Hitler and his wife, Eva Braun, whom he'd married the day before. On April 30th, 1945, nearly 60 feet underground in a bunker underneath his Berlin headquarters, the German dictator and his wife each swallowed a cyanide capsule. Just over a week later, the German forces surrendered in cities across Europe. And on May 8th, 1945, the free world rejoiced in what would come to be known as Victory in Europe, or VE Day. Millions of Allied citizens took to the streets to celebrate the end of the Nazi threat and rejoice in the triumph of freedom and democracy. Of course, the war was not over. While Great Britain and the Allies in Europe could at last take a breath, the United States now stood alone against Imperial Japan in the Pacific. Though Japan was severely weakened, the soldiers of the Imperial Army, who were trained in the ancient ways of samurai warfare, would not stop until either they conquered the Allies or they themselves were conquered. Finally, the Americans were left with no choice except two destructive options. Either commission a second D-Day invasion of sorts, this time into Japan, and risk losing millions of young American soldiers, or option two, use a secret weapon to force Japan into surrender, the atomic bomb. Finally, on August 6, 1945, the Americans dropped one bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, and on August 9th, they dropped a second on Nagasaki. The cost was devastating, and let me be clear, this was a tragedy. The total death toll numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and many who died were civilians. But let me also be clear that this was a necessary act to save millions more lives and to stop an evil empire. The bomb dropping forced Imperial Japan to surrender on August 14, 1945, in what would come to be known as Victory in Japan, or VJ Day. And at long last, World War II was over, and the free world was victorious. Thanks so much for joining me once again for a moment in history.
My name is Vance. I have 5 kids total. I was basically a single mom. I didn't have an address to my name, and here it comes, you know, that not just one baby I'm finna have, it was 3. I honestly was not gonna keep them. I had it in my mind deep down inside that I couldn't do it. I came straight abortion minded. What changed my mind was I talked to the counselor, and, you know, very encouraging. They'll also tell me, you know, you're not going to be alone. You know, if you need anything, you know, reach out to us or anything. I was amazed. I definitely have a challenge of having my babies. A lot of people will ask me, how do you do that? You know, how do you maintain? Only thing I can say is prayer. Like, prayer really, really worked.
To donate, just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or go to financialissues.org and click on the preborn banner.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same, or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
Hey there, welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We're going to kick off this segment with some shocking, never-before-seen footage that is now emerged after being kept under wraps for years now. This week, the California-based pro-life group known as the Center for Medical Progress shared a disturbing new video showing a Planned Parenthood employee agreeing to sell organs of an aborted baby, telling an undercover reporter at the time that the financial incentive will make her employers very happy.
Just that livers are, I mean, we could pay you $1,000 up to $1,500 for a liver.
Yeah.
Because that's in such high demand from our.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just great. And I think the fact that there's like for me, it's just like somebody to take it would be great. But I think financial incentive from you guys is going to be like, to the people we have to get this approved will be very happy about it.
According to the Daily Wire, the video was seized by Kamala Harris's office back in 2016 during her time as Attorney General of California at the specific request of Planned Parenthood itself. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene obtained it through a subpoena earlier this year and recently published it. In an interview with the Daily Wire, CMP President David Daleiden, he was actually charged over these videos, described the tape as too incriminating to explain away, saying, quote, "You can see just from the first video why Planned Parenthood tried so hard to cover this up for 8 years.
Truly a disturbing story indeed. And along the lines of pro-life news, we also got another disturbing statistic recently. According to a Daily Caller report, 97% of total FACE Act prosecutions have been used against pro-life Americans. Now, this act is not often used as a charge against individuals, but from 1994, when it was essentially put into law, to 2024, it was used in 205 cases against pro-life activists and only 6 times against abortion activists. But what's more is that the Biden administration has contributed greatly to those numbers in just over 3 years. According to the data, Biden's Justice Department has levied more than 25% of the total FACE Act charges during the Biden administration's term. Many of these cases consist of people praying silently outside of abortion clinics as well. But on the other hand, according to the Crime Prevention Center, pro-life groups in 2022 specifically actually experienced over 22 times more violence against them than pro-choice organizations. All in all, this data is adding credibility to accusations that the current Department of Justice is being weaponized against pro-life Americans.
And as we get closer to November, one watchdog group is now raising some serious concerns about potential voter fraud. According to a new report from the nonpartisan group known as Fight Voter Fraud, nearly 300,000 Americans are actually registered to vote more than once, some of them as much as 4 times across multiple states. The group raised particular concern in swing states. In Wisconsin, the group found 1,900 double registered voters, 2,700 in Arizona, 3,000 in Michigan, and 6,400 in Georgia. Meanwhile, deep blue states, California and New York, they had the highest number of double registrations, with New York having 10,000 and California over 36,000.
Some wild numbers to hear, but
really.
Why don't we end our coverage again on some news coming out of the Olympics, where 2 American women athletes continue to make history this week. 27-year-old Simone Biles came out on top yesterday after a highly competitive women's gymnastics all-around final. It's her 6th Olympic gold medal and 9th overall, but the achievement goes far beyond that. In fact, only 2 others before her have won the all-around gold twice, and it's been nearly 80 years since it was last done. Biles happened to do it with a record 8-year gap between wins and as the oldest event champion since 1952. Meanwhile, in swimming, Katie Ledecky and her teammates snatched silver yesterday in the 4x200 meter relay. That's Ledecky's 13th medal, making her officially the most decorated American woman in Olympic history.
Very exciting to see those records broken during the Olympics, always what makes it fun. And with that, that is our program for today. So thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content until Monday. And for any other updates, you can also follow us on social media. We're at FISM News, or you can download the FISM app as well. Thanks so much, God bless, and we'll see you on Monday.